Good afternoon, and welcome back. We are so excited to be gathering with you in person today. I'm Elizabeth Barker, the museum's executive director, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the Frick Pittsburgh, which occupies ancestral lands of the Haudenosaunee, Lenape, Osage, and Shawnee peoples. As a place of history and nature, the Frick recognizes the cultural importance of land and the role of cultural institutions in the formation of collective memory. Displacement and erasure are not just histories for Native peoples. Land acknowledgements, like historic sites themselves, are exercises in the preservation and reconciliation, engaged with past, present, and future. Our lecture today is free to all, thanks to the visionary support of the Frick Societies, our leadership donors whose ongoing investment makes possible everything we do. Thank you. And our audience today is even larger than the group that has assembled here, since this lecture is being live streamed around the world, a practice we began during the pandemic and that we're very excited to be carrying forward hereafter. We'll publish the recording on the Frick Pittsburgh's YouTube channel, where you can share it with friends who might be missing watching it right now. And this is certain to be a lecture that you'll want to share with others. Our speaker today is Tim Barringer, Paul Mellon Professor of the History of Art at Yale University, a distinguished scholar of the art of Britain and the Atlantic world after 1700, mentor now to a generation of scholars who are collectively transforming the field of art history in the United States, the organizing curator of the Victorian Radicals exhibition, now on view here at the Frick Pittsburgh, and by happy coincidence, my long-standing friend. Tim's many publications include the books Reading the Pre-Raphaelites and Men at Work, Art and Labor in Victorian Britain. His honors include delivering the Paul Mellon Lectures at the National Gallery in London, holding the Distinguished Slade Professorship at the University of Cambridge, as well as the J. Clausen Mills Fellowship at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This afternoon, he will speak to us about Victorian Radicals today. Please join me in welcoming Tim Barringer back to the Frick Pittsburgh.
Well, thank you. I think I can call you Lizzie in front of all these people, and it's a thrill to be back here. But what's really thrilling is to actually see people, human beings, not squares on a digital screen. We've been doing so much by Zoom, and it's really wonderful to see both all of you here in the room, anyone who's watching online, but also to have the chance to engage with the objects and paintings in the collection. I saw this exhibition last in New Haven, Connecticut in March 2020, looking forward to having 6 months or 3 months to teach with it and think through it. And of course, it disappeared back into its boxes at the moment the pandemic started. So to see it again on the wall really gives me an absolute delight. And I want to particularly thank the entire team here, especially Dawn Breen. Where is she? Where's Dawn? To thank Dawn for a wonderful installation. The work looks really magnificent. And this building, I think, really speaks to the work, to the period of the work, and to the spirit of the work. So it looks absolutely great here. Let me now turn on my... There we are. And I want to also acknowledge this is a collaboration between three curators. I'm only one of them. Martin Ellis and Victoria Osborne work and have worked for their whole careers. Martin's now retired at the Museum and Art Gallery in Birmingham in Britain, in the Midlands. Birmingham, one of the great industrial cities of the world, and many, many connections with Pittsburgh. It's a city which has rich cultural institutions, which has an incredible industrial architecture, long history of productivity across various three-dimensional forms of metalwork and jewellery, particularly in Birmingham, and motor cars as well in the 20th century. Birmingham, a city which has also had many of the challenges that have faced Pittsburgh in the late 20th and into the 21st century. It's a city redefining itself as a post-industrial city. So I think there's a lot of the story that's told by the objects in this show is a story which is shared, I think, with Pittsburgh, and that I hope will interest audiences here. And it's worth saying that every single object in this exhibition comes from this one museum collection. It is the best collection in the world of Victorian art and fine art, paintings, drawings, prints, and material objects of many kinds. It was a thrill to be able to borrow stained glass and ceramics and metalwork, as well as the great paintings that we're looking at in this exhibition. It's an exhibition about industry, although you don't actually see in quite the way you might industry. This is a panorama of Birmingham in about 1840, and you can see that it has all of the characteristics of a big industrial city. It has the smokestacks, the pollution, the areas of, this is metal forging here. It also has the civic institutions, that's the town hall. I think they've rather exaggerated the way the town hall rises up out of the gloom, but any of you who are classical musicians, that's the place where Mendelssohn's oratorio Elijah was first performed in 1846. So it was a cultural centre as well as an industrial centre, and a centre of political reform and radicalism, because it was here that some of the great political meetings of the 19th century were held, demanding, for example, the vote for working men. There was a great reform riot and demonstration in 1832 in Birmingham. We often use the term industrial revolution, and it just trips off the tongue lightly. But really we have to think about how industrialization changed the world in ways in which we are now reaping the rewards, or the terrible problems, the whirlwind really that was let loose. I like to think of this as the first painting of the Anthropocene. It's often described as about 1800 is the moment when the changes to the world's atmosphere created by industry became irreversible. That something happened which could not be undone. And this painting was made in 1801. So I think this is the first one. This is the first painting. This is Philippe de Loutherbourg, a French artist, who went to Coalbrookdale to observe the extraordinary ironworks, the way in which incredible high temperatures were used, and of course nobody in Pittsburgh needs me to explain about the making of steel, which was an absolutely essential component of the Industrial Revolution. This exhibition is about how artists and cultural thinkers came to grips with the new world that was generated by industrialization, the new possibilities, the new wealth, the new energy, but also the terrible consequences for the environment, and in many cases the terrible conditions of work that were endured by the laborers in these factories, the huge number of people who moved from the countryside into Birmingham to work in the metalworking industries. And I'm very glad to see that Dawn has given great prominence to an object which thrills me. This is an object made in Birmingham in 1850 for display at the Great Exhibition of 1851, which I'll talk to you about in 1 second. And it seems to me to combine some of the themes of the exhibition because it's a superb clock, a clock which is the most modern of objects, especially if you look around the back. You can see it really looks like a piece of modern machinery. But at the front it also harks back to a Gothic world. There's a distinct use of Gothic stylization, medieval, as if somehow this clock is trying to deal with time as it is in the present and future, but also to look back to time, as indeed did this man, Sir Walter Scott, the great novelist, the author of Ivanhoe, who set the tone of thinking about history in creative ways, thinking about the imaginatively entering the world of history. Everyone was reading novels of Walter Scott in the period that we're going to talk about. He took us back to a better world, to a world of knights in shining armor, a world of beautiful Gothic cathedrals, and so on. So this clock is both high-tech and looking back to a better world. It's a fascinating object. Be sure to go around the back, because in a way I'd like to think this exhibition is going around the back to tell you the inside story of 19th century art and culture. But in quite a key way, the exhibition is really a tale of two textiles. Because if you go in, you might be shocked to see a lurid pink carpet in the middle of the very tasteful Frick Pittsburgh galleries. A beautiful green velvet wall, beautiful wooden floor, and then this screaming carpet. Now, I love this carpet. It comes from the same part of the world that I do. In fact, it was made not 20 miles from where I grew up, in Yorkshire, in the north of England, and it's a machine-made carpet. And in 1850, it's the same date as the clock, 1850, they were so proud of this carpet because it could be made at 20, 30, 40 times the speed of a hand-knitted carpet, or a hand-knotted carpet, I should say. It could be woven on looms powered by steam engines, steam-powered looms, and all of the materials, the wool, was spun mechanically. The dyes were produced from chemicals, which were created through chemical processing made from coal and other materials. So it is a completely modern object. Now, of course, it's not a modernist object, and I think Frank Lloyd Wright would have nightmares about a carpet like this. But it is actually, in many ways, more modern than Falling Water or one of the great Frank Lloyd Wright houses. It's absolutely machine-produced. That's at the beginning of the exhibition. At the end of the exhibition is this handmade object, a very beautiful linen bed cover by Mary Jane Newell. It took many months to make. It's a quiet and thoughtful object. It's an object made from, it's hand embroidered with silks which were dyed with vegetable dyes. Now you might think this is the old and the machine made is the new, that the world moved from a handmade to a machine made kind of production. This exhibition shows a very different story. It shows artists, designers, theorists turning against the machine, turning against pollution, turning against the kinds of things that happened in the mills where these carpets were created. This is by Crossley and Sons of Batley in Yorkshire. This is actually the Black Dyke Mills. If any of you are experts on English brass band music, you will know that the Black Dyke Mills Band was one of the great sounds of the Industrial Revolution. They still exist. So we've got the connection between this enormous space and then the work that went on inside it and this product. The work that went on inside it was not creative, or it was skillful only in one sense, that you had to keep the machines going. Any time the machine stopped the owner lost money, and the workers would lose pay. So at all costs, these machines must be kept going on all night. They worked round the clock, 24 hours shift work. Local girls who probably had been maybe born on farms would come to work in the industrial centre. And what you don't see in this nice illustration, which makes it all look very clean and tidy, is the fact that many of the employees were young children of the age of 6, 7, 8, 9. The reason they were employed was if these machines got jammed, then money was being wasted to keep the coal, to keep the steam running. Little fingers had to go into the machines to pull the threads back so that they could be spinning and weaving. Well, these are weaving machines, looms, power looms, that they could keep weaving. Often the machines were turned back on before all the little fingers were taken out, and many children were maimed by these machines. It's a horrible, horrible history of profit making being more important than the lives of workers. So that's the world of 1850. Now, why were all these objects made in 1850? Well, because there was an advertisement sent out by the British government, or by a bureaucrat, Henry Cole, of the British government, co-signed by Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, the Prince Consort, that in 1851 there would be an exhibition that would demonstrate that Britain was the greatest industrial nation in the world, that British goods were the best, and every other nation in the world would be expected to send goods to London to show alongside the British ones, and Henry Cole was pretty sure the Brits would triumph in this, and there would be prizes given out for the best objects. It was called the Great Exhibition of the Industry of All Nations, and it was supposed to be the moment when peace broke out among brothers, except that everyone acknowledged that the Brits were the top nation. And as long as they did that, then everyone could be peaceful. This is what it was, and it was housed in the Crystal Palace at the top left there, which was the first prefabricated building. It was made in parts in Birmingham, actually. It was cast, and then the cast parts were put on the train and taken to London. It was like the world's largest IKEA bookshelf, right? It came prefabricated, and inside it, this space of modernity was filled with objects. And our exhibition opens with objects that were shown in that exhibition. There's the carpet we've talked about, but also objects made possible by new technologies. You could buy a work of art to put on your mantelpiece, even if you really had relatively little money, because sculptures like the one on the left, which is a Minton & Co. Parian ware sculpture called Solitude by John Lawler, they were mass-produced. They were made in molds, and they were banged out in hundreds and thousands. And so you could buy one very, very cheaply. And there's a kind of democratization of arts. This is no longer for the Medici. This is for the man in the street, for the person who works in an office job. Even a working class person could probably afford one of these. On the right, we have one of my favorite objects in the show. Do go and look at it. We use the word cut glass, but we don't really think what that means. But what that meant at this time was that you had a saw powered by steam, so the teeth of the saw are moving at an incredibly fast speed, and that someone, a skilled workman, would actually move glass into the saw to cut deep trenches into the glass. So every single one of these lines was hand cut with a steam-powered saw. Imagine getting your finger a little too close to that. Imagine the spray of shards and sparks that would fly as you did that. It made this wonderful, shiny Victorian object. A perfect example of the Crystal Palace, the kind of thing that was celebrated at the Crystal Palace. And let's look at it here in the installation at the Yale Centre for British Art. Look at the horrible wall colour there compared to your beautiful walls here. I'm just saying. And look at the way that we installed it there, as you have here, as an épergne, or a serving dish. But look on the right at this wonderful Victorian object, which, in order to sell more, they said, yeah, but you can also put it upside down and serve celery out of the base. So it becomes a celery dispenser. So it was a sort of double market. Celery was very popular with Victorian consumers. We also did this is the installation on the right in Seattle, where it's on the fault line. The museum is on the fault line, and just in case there was a slight earthquake, we thought we'd better have it that way up, so that there was no danger of it falling over in the case. Now, at this time, there were already voices in 1851 saying, these things are mechanically splendid, they're also hideous. They are vulgar, they're crude, they're too pink, they're too shiny, they're too glittery, there's no spirit to them. And one of those people was Augustus Welby Northmoor Pugin, what a name. Pugin, who created this stained glass on the right-hand side of the screen here. On the left-hand side we have an attempt to simplify the form of a drinking beaker. This is by Richard Redgrave. But let's think of Pugin, because Pugin argued that modern society had just got it wrong, and that actually if you were to sort of wind back the clock to the Middle Ages, you could find a society where everyone believed the same faith. So before the Reformation, before the split in the church, everyone lived in the same town, in an organic community where the rich looked after the poor, and all was a kind of caring community, an organic community. This is, if you do your social history reading, a load of rubbish. It was pretty miserable to be a peasant in medieval England. But Pugin felt that the splitting up of society into competing classes, labour and capital, was actually damaging to the environment, but damaging also to what the world looked like. He got his one big break when he was commissioned to design this building, which you will recognise. He did the decorative work for the Palace of Westminster. He designed the tower, which has the bell Big Ben in it. And he chose the Gothic style because he wanted England to return to its medieval self, to chivalry, to obligations on the part of the rich to look after the poor. And while he was working on the designs for Westminster, he created this wonderful sketch, which was an etching published in his book Contrasts. Now, the Victorians were very fond of saying in 1851 at the Great Exhibition, look at progress, look at what we've achieved. And Pugin's Contrasts did exactly the opposite. He shows us a town in 1440 and a town in 1840. What is the progress that we've made in 400 years? In 1440 we have cathedrals, we have the village green with everyone meeting together, we have a world of beauty. In 1840 the village green has a panopticon prison built over it. The beautiful parish church is replaced by a Methodist chapel. The area for the poor to enjoy nature has become a gasworks. And if you look at all of the towers, they're now smokestacks instead of cathedrals. So he was saying, essentially, we got it horribly, horribly wrong. Pugin was, in many ways, a reactionary. He just wanted to go backwards. But at the same time, politics were bubbling in England. So 1848, just 3 years before the Great Exhibition, there was the Great Chartist demonstration in South London. This was a moment this was the moment of the Great British Revolution, except that it rained and everyone went home and had a cup of tea and there wasn't a revolution. We're still waiting. I think Boris Johnson might push us over the edge. But at any rate, this was the moment when a group of working men a huge group, gathered together, and they said, we are the slaves of capital. We demand protection for our labor. We are political serfs. We demand to be free. They wanted a fair day's wage for a fair day's work. This was the edge of a kind of political explosion. At the edge, somewhere down here, were a group of young artists from the art school, the Royal Academy, who were to form later that year, 1848, into the PreRaphaelite group. Now, the PreRaphaelites did not decide to overturn Western civilization. They just decided to overturn Western art, which was in itself a revolution. These were art students. They were studying at the academy where this was the kind of painting that you might have seen on the wall. It's delightful. David Cox, a picture of the outskirts of Birmingham, at Harborne actually, which is where I lived when I was teaching at the University of Birmingham, and let me tell you, it does not look like this anymore. There is a gasworks, and there is a canal, and there is a railway. In other words, this is nostalgia. Even when Cox painted this, Harborne didn't look like this anymore. But this is the English landscape picturesque. And then the other thing you were told when you were a student at the Royal Academy schools was that you should base everything you do on the example of the great masters, which is what the people teaching at the schools at the time did. So here is the painting in the exhibition by Edwin Landseer, one of the teachers of the young students I'm talking about. And here is the Rubens painting on which he clearly is basing his Hunt at Chevy Chase painting here, this great Rubens in the Metropolitan Museum. And again, another of their teachers, William Dyce, based his art on a kind of homage to the artist that everyone agreed was the best artist, the greatest in the canon, possibly except Michelangelo, but really, actually, even better, Raphael. This is William Dyce, 1840. This is Raphael, 1508. So you were supposed to obey. You were supposed to obey history, obey the masters. This is the work of a young student, brilliant kid, John Everett Millais, one of the Academy students of 1848. Millais invited some of his friends. Any of us who've been graduate students know what it is to go and sit in someone's house and drink too much coffee and then drink too much wine and put the world to rights, a group of people chatting. And here they are. This is the group of students from the Royal Academy in 1848 who decided to form a rebellious brotherhood. And their rebellion was not the same as the Chartists. They weren't going to blow up the Parliament building. What they were going to do was to reverse the history of art, to essentially take the gear stick of the history of art and put it into reverse, to ignore what they'd been told, which is that Raphael is the greatest artist on earth, and to take the painting that was exhibited at the National Gallery as an example of what they call primitive art, crude, old-fashioned art, the kind of lack of perspective, the lack of the finesse that the teachers at the Academy said, don't paint like this. The only reason this was bought by Charles Eastlake was to show how far art came between Lorenzo Monaco in 1300 and Raphael in 1500. This is the bad stuff. What did they do? They did what all students do, my students do it all the time, which is to take what you say and then turn it exactly on its head. Tell them not to paint like Raphael, they will paint like Raphael. In this case, tell them to paint like Raphael, and they will paint like Lorenzo Monaco. This is John Everett Millais. We just saw his student drawing. Isabella, 1849. It's in the Liverpool Museum. If you don't believe me, look at those three figures, and then look at three figures in Lorenzo Monaco. Yellow, pink, blocks of color, the way the heads are positioned, the detail in the faces, almost like the detail in a modern photograph, which you could see in 1848, 1849. This is a painting which deliberately gets it wrong. The perspective is wonky, deliberately wonky. Millais knew how to make a perfect illusion and chose not to, in order to go back to a deeper truth that he found in this earlier art. Here's another painting that was bought to show just how bad art used to be before Raphael, right? Jan van Eyck, 1434, the Arnolfini marriage. And you can see how the spiky style, the close observation of detail, the compression of space, allowed these young artists to try and think of a new style of painting. They started off really imitating this style. And I'm so thrilled that you have here in Pittsburgh this drawing. It's very rare to see this extremely fragile work, very early work of John Everett Millais from 1848, so the year that they started this rebellion. And this is right out there in the gallery. Look at the spiky, pointed style of this drawing. This is a pre-Raphaelite drawing. It goes back before Raphael made everything sweet and rounded. This is another example by his friend William Holman Hunt, who we'll come back to. Now, sorry, that's Dante Gabriel Rossetti, what I'm talking about. This is Dante Gabriel Rossetti, the third member of the group. Apologies. This painting takes the whole thing much further, and this is the great masterpiece that we pinned this exhibition on. When you see it, when you walk straight in, that's a masterstroke of dawn. It's the first painting you see opposite you as you enter the show. The Blind Girl by John Everett Millais. What's different about this painting? Well, think back to the Raphael with the Madonna in the landscape. And instead of the Virgin Mary, we see a pauper. We see a disabled person, a blind woman from a local, sitting by the side of a road, who's, if you can see the sign there, it says, "Pity the blind." So this is about sight, but it's also about replacing the Virgin Mary with a real person who somehow society has done a disservice to, someone who has to beg in order to make a living. She plays the concertina, the accordion. Her sister can see, and her sister looks behind her at this spectacular landscape. And it turns out that what the Pre-Raphaelites really took from the early art that they looked at is that you paint the truth, not the beautiful. You paint the true. You paint what is really there, not what art history tells you should be there or what makes a beautiful picture. So every detail of nature, the exact movement of the clouds, the rainbow, let's have a look at some details. Every detail of clothing, even if it's not perfect. So if we get down to the, you just get really close to this picture. Don't freak out the guards, but get as close as you can, because you can see the way that the textiles have been rubbed, and these are, hobnail boots. They're not beautiful shoes. These girls are begging, and every detail of nature is painted in the same level of detail. If you look at the smoke coming out of the chimneys, that's a tiny detail in the painting. If we look at these rainbows, there's a nice story with this, is that when the painting was exhibited, John Everett Millais got a letter from the Royal Society, the scientific institution in London, from a scientist who said, Millais, when there are two rainbows, the first one starts off with indigo blue, etc., and it ends with red, and then the second one starts with red and ends with blue. He had it wrong in the painting. Because he hadn't managed to sketch it quickly enough before the second rainbow disappeared. So he scraped out this whole area of the sky and repainted it scientifically accurately. He was determined to paint the truth in small things, tiny details of the hedgerow. Raphael probably didn't bother with this. Certainly most artists of the 19th century didn't bother with donkeys and with butterflies and with giving you a real sense of the nails, the slightly dirty fingernails of this young woman. Every detail in the painting. So do spend some time with it. This is what the great critic John Ruskin advised, that you should bring a magnifying glass with you to the exhibition to look closely at a painting. And there's another great example, I won't spend much time on it, Arthur Hughes, The Long Engagement. He was a follower of the Pre-Raphaelites. And you can see there's an example of Victorian dress in the exhibition. You can see how the Pre-Raphaelites also were prepared to actually make representations of what the world really looked like. These modern textiles suddenly became utterly fascinating alongside nature. So if you get in close to the Hughes, the story is it's a kind of amusing Victorian story. You can imagine a novel. So this underpaid clergyman has proposed to this girl called Amy from a respectable family, but until he's promoted higher up the hierarchy with a bigger salary, Amy's father will not let him marry her. How do I know all this? Well, look at his face. He's not happy. Amy has been waiting some time already. They're deeply in love. The dog is faithful. This is machine-woven textiles, probably from that factory I showed you earlier, right? He's showing us the modern world, everything in perfect detail. Meanwhile, in the background, the squirrels are allowed to get on with their sex life unimpeded, but the unfortunately Victorian mores will not allow that in the foreground. Nature is observed with precision. Look at that ivy. Quite remarkable. And here is the detail that gives it all away. Some years ago, this useless clergyman has inscribed Amy's name into the tree, a bit of vandalism here, and the ivy has grown over it. It's been so long. And like she clings to him like ivy round a tree, which may not be a good idea for her, but that's what the Victorian way was with such stories. Let me just go back and show you the entire composition again. I mentioned nature a lot, and of course at a moment when towns like Birmingham were destroying nature at a huge rate, this was a moment when the attention of Victorian thinking turned to nature. It's the moment when Charles Darwin is looking at nature and coming up with his theory of evolution. It's also the moment when John Ruskin, this is the critic John Ruskin, painted by John Everett Millais, Ruskin turned his attention to nature. He was interested in geology and in botany and in climatology. he was interested in what the world looks like. There's a fantastic example, a different one in the exhibition. This is one of the other works of John Ruskin. You can see that he's analyzing the underlying structures of nature by looking very, very closely, and observing closely. This is what the Pre-Raphaelites got from him. Ruskin, though, went further. Ruskin actually understood what was happening. He looked in the sky, and he looked very closely. And he saw the sky changing from year to year, getting darker and darker. And he called it the storm cloud of the 19th century. He said, when you look above you, you see a dense manufacturer's mist, which is made of dead men's souls. Of course, what he was looking at was carbon. And he was quite right that that does kill. It kills when you breathe it in, but it also kills through global warming. And he noticed that because he watched these glaciers in the Alps, which he loved, get smaller and smaller, even in the 1840s and 50s. So he was one of the first people to draw attention to the crisis caused by industrialization. Other members of the circle, such as Ford Maddox Brown, took this really seriously. So Ford Maddox Brown gives us this fun picture. It's just a charming folderol picture of a little baby and a mother dressed in fancy costume, talking to the lambs outside. It's called the Pretty Bar Lambs. Couldn't be a serious painting, except that it's also a sort of treatise on botany, because if you get close, every detail is painted with this obsessional labor, and you even see the lamb jumping in sort of vertical takeoff, captured, how lambs jump and gamble in the spring. He's even caught that natural detail of the lambs. This is one of the most amazing objects. Now, how on earth can we link that to this painting, which is such a powerful presence at the beginning of the exhibition? This is William Holman Hunt, another of the Pre-Raphaelite rebels. And the title of the painting is The Finding of the Savior in the Temple. So it's the biblical scene where Jesus enters the temple and debates with the rabbis. This does not look like Jesus in art. This is not the traditional figure. This is actually Holman Hunt saying, what would it have looked like at that date in reality? So he traveled to the Holy Land, he traveled to Palestine, traveled to Jerusalem to paint, to draw, to make notes. Of course, he kind of assumed that nothing had changed in 2,000 years, which was a bit of a mistake. But he wanted to do what a scientist or a historian would do, and to turn art into a kind of instructional realism. And this painting deserves tremendously close attention. But the point that I want to draw from it now is that the Pre-Raphaelites were interested in truth. That could take them into, really into racial caricature, because what Holman Hunt thought he was doing was identifying a Jewish type. In fact, these men were painted in London because he couldn't find anyone to sit for him in the Middle East. He thought he was identifying a kind of deeper truth. It's a very problematic way of approaching the subject. Here is the figure of Christ, and the painting is full of symbols, such as on Christ's belt is this cross, which of course prefigures the crucifixion. All sorts of wonderful details in this painting. Truth could also tell uncomfortable stories about the world around us. And I do recommend you spend some time with Henry Wallace's painting, The Stonebreaker from 1858. This is telling the truth about labor, about what happens to the poor, the people who are at the bottom of the hierarchy. So the stonebreaker was someone who was so poor that he was taken into a workhouse, into a sort of prison-like structure, and sent out every day to break stones on the road to create new roads for the expanding infrastructure. And you can see he's been chopping these very hard flint stones here. But he has collapsed during his labor. And if we go in closer, we can see all kinds of natural details. But we also see this. Now, you need to get your nose right up to the picture to see this. That is a stoat, which is a creature that only comes out at night and only comes near the human body when it's cold. In other words, it tells you that this man is dead and that he's actually been killed by the horrifying cruelty of the Victorian workhouse system. It's a very beautiful painting, a kind of requiem for lost life through the cruelty of industry. This picture, I warn you, I've written a book on this picture, and I could spend a lot of time on it. It took him 13 years to paint. Ford Maddox Brown, it's a painting called Work. It took me 13 years to write a book about it. I will summarize. This painting, which is quite extraordinary. It's like looking at a novel by Charles Dickens or George Eliot, but in paint, in front of you. It explains the meaning of work, and it criticizes old-fashioned ideas of labor and presents a new one. So we have here the philosophers who think about labor, Thomas Carlisle, from whom many details in the painting are derived. But this is the surprising character, because this is the man right at the center of the picture, and this is just the kind of person that had been left out of art for the previous 5 centuries, and just the kind of thing that the Royal Academy would think was unacceptable. This is a guy who digs a hole in the road. Might call him a navvy because of digging the trenches for canals, navigations they were called. Sweaty, big, dangerous, out of control, heavy drinker, but a useful guy because he makes holes in the road. Now, normally such a person, if they showed up at all in Victorian culture, would appear in a caricature as a dirty, dangerous, filthy kind of figure. Here, I don't know if anyone recognizes that profile. It's the Apollo Belvedere, the most beautiful classical sculpture, the pinnacle of Hellenistic Greek art in the Vatican collection, and forward Maddox Brown poses a filthy, sweaty Irish navvy as the most beautiful man because he's the most useful man, because he actually does a day's work, unlike the bourgeois, and even more unlike the aristocracy who are at the back. Now, he also had a sense of humor, which is essential when you study British art because, some of it's weird and some of it's funny. Forward Maddox Brown shows us the English class system in dog form. So you need to go very carefully look at this painting. In the foreground, the working dog catching rats, very useful. They called it a Jack Russell, but I don't know whether that's still the same breed. The dog that everyone's forgotten, the mutt, the jog in the street like the homeless children. But the homeless children have made a little collar for him out of the refuse from the planing of wood. The middle-class dog, really irritating. Fancy dog wearing a fancy collar, and this guy has spent all day making a pile of sand, and this dog just walks straight through it, disrespectful, no use. It belongs to her, no use. And finally, at the back, the aristocrat. This is Boris Johnson again. This is a hunting dog. In order to have a Labrador, you have to have an estate to hunt foxes on. So may I present to you, ladies and gentlemen, the entire British class system in dog form. Now, the PreRaphaelites, this is, at least he found it funny, because it really wasn't all that funny. If you happen to be this guy, and I say guy, you might think woman, because it's the sort of dress-like garment, but actually it's a ripped old raincoat. And look at the feet. These are male feet. It could be a kind of trans figure, someone moving from one gender position to another. But at any rate, this person is selling flowers, which are called in England, if any of you are familiar with English gardens, forget-me-nots. That's the politics. Forget me not. Don't forget the poor. Right? You see the politics coming through here. These flowers are reminding us that this person needs education, needs care. Otherwise, we'll end up in a bad situation. When I had this painting in an exhibition in London in 2012, we managed to get the BBC lunchtime news to cover it. And I thought, maybe this is my moment to get my political painting into the bloodstream of the nation. And obviously, David Cameron will now change all his policies as a result of seeing the PreRaphaelite. Anyway, he didn't see the news bulletin, so that's why we're in bad shape now. But there we are, work by Forward Maddox Brown. Now, to lead you through the rest of the exhibition, we have to have a complete change of mood, because this artist on the right, Dante, Gabriel, Rossetti, was one of those original rebels, but he took his rebellion in a completely different direction. Instead of rebelling against the real world by showing its problems through direct representation and precision of indexical mirroring of the world, he took us into a fantasy world. He took us into a world of the medieval, a world where things were beautiful, things were eroticism was all around us. There's art, there's music, there's color. It was one could call it an escape, but it's really a creation of an alternative reality. He was aided, I think, or probably this was made possible by his collaboration with someone who started as a model for him, but became an artist of, I think, equal power, and that is Elizabeth Siddall. You see here a work by Elizabeth Siddall. There are two drawings by Siddall in the exhibition. She died, alas, very young in 1861, so produced very little. But she actually, I think, came up with a more radical way of looking at Gothic art. Look at those S curves that she's discovered in Gothic art, and the way that she's actually brought that Gothic swoop into modern art. Rossetti starts to look a bit fussy and Victorian compared to Elizabeth Siddall, I think. But Rossetti did create this highly eroticized, fantastical image, not just in paint, but also in poetry, because he was a published poet, even at the age of 19. So this is a representation of his own poem, Prozapina, which is, of course, about the classical figure who returns with the spring, but has to return to Hades because she's eaten of the fruit of the dead, the pomegranate. So it's this mystical image of woman as a kind of mythic figure that comes through Rossetti's art. And these, of course, have been, very interestingly, had a second life through the internet. These are all over Google, these images. I find this more interesting because this is the work of Simeon Solomon, a young Jewish artist in Victorian London who was much influenced by the PreRaphaelites, especially Rossetti, but whose gender position himself, his own gender position, put him outside of the conventional language of brotherhoods and academies because he was absolutely out and gay in words that we would use today. But he lived a very public life as a homosexual in London and was eventually, tragically, I think, arrested and imprisoned, and then after that abandoned by the circle around him. In the years, though, when he was a prominent artist, he created this remarkable painting, which is in the exhibition, Bacchus. And you can see what he's done. He's taken the Rossetti type, but he's changed the gender coding. Bacchus, the god of wine, who sometimes took a female and sometimes took a male persona in classical myth, and was often a kind of ambivalent figure, is seen here. I mean, this is a sort of trans image from 1868, exhibited at the Royal Academy. It's a reworking of Rossetti in ways that are truly radical, and were too radical for, alas, for conventional Victorian views, although this painting was very successful when it was exhibited. So the last move of the exhibition is to follow two other artists who were students at Oxford in the 1850s. They hated the Crystal Palace. They read Ruskin. They met Ruskin. They met Rossetti. And they decided that machinery was destroying the world. They decided that in a very prescient way. They decided that rather than becoming, I'll come back to that in one second, rather than becoming priests, which is what they had in mind, they would actually change the world through making beautiful objects. Now, what they read in Ruskin was an analysis of this painting by William Holman Hunt, another PreRaphaelite picture. And you can see it's a sort of reworking of the Van Eyck that we talked about. Ruskin said, this piano has a fatal newness. This piano is not a loved object. It's a shiny, machine-cut, machine-polished, ugly, musicless, loveless object. And William Morris and Edward Burne-Jones read that and thought, we can solve this. First of all, they started buying junk, bric-a-brac, suits of armor, and they filled an apartment in London with complete junk. They then bought old furniture, and Edward Burne-Jones, see, here he is, did the extraordinary thing. You can see him doing it here. He started painting on the furniture. You don't paint on furniture. But he did. And he created a kind of new medieval furniture. William Morris, just luckily, happened to be wealthy enough to build himself a perfect neo-medieval house. Philip Webb designed for him the Red House. And he tried to paint a kind of interior for it with his wife, Jane Bird and Jane Morris, as Queen Guinevere. He decided he wasn't much good at painting, so instead of painting it, he would actually make it. He would create the house. Jane, we should note, was herself a very skilled embroiderer, very skilled needlewoman, and she also became Rossetti's lover and the basis for all those late paintings of Rossetti's that we see in the exhibition. This is what they came up with in the Red House, and you can now visit it in South London. It's now a National Trust property. They painted on the walls, which you just don't do in Victorian England. Burne-Jones painted frescoes. They painted the furniture. They created simple wooden furniture based on old folk furniture they found in cottages in Sussex and rural parts of England. And then they commissioned, when they couldn't find it, beautiful glassware from Philip Webb, the same architect who created the house. And you can see these objects in the exhibition. What's really interesting about them is they're ancient, they're medieval, and they're modern. What they don't look like is our famous celery dispenser. They don't look fancy and Victorian and Crystal Palace. They look like something from King Arthur's court. They also look like something from Vienna in 1920. They miss out the whole industrial bit in between. You can look at these. Extraordinarily enough, we have the actual ones from William Morris's dining table in the exhibition here. They are his own glasses, these wonderful objects. They also took up from Pugin the idea of returning to stained glass, making churches beautiful again, not these white painted walls of the Protestant churches that they grew up with. Let's return to beauty. So Rossetti did the designs, and Morris of the figures. Morris did the designs of the floral decoration. Ceramics, in this case a female artist, Lucy Faulkner, was painting tiles, and Morris started to create textiles. Now, what was different about these is that they are not made for factory production. They're not made on steam looms. There are no children losing their fingers in the production of a William Morris textile. It takes months because he dyed in this case, wool, himself using organic dyes made from local plants, mainly, some imported. He based the patterns on things he observed. So this strawberry thief, my favorite, is based on, this is the house that William Morris lived in Oxfordshire, Kelmscott Manor, and down here is the strawberry patch. And I'm very glad to say that when I was there on a very wet day once in June, I actually saw a thrush, which is this bird, come and eat a strawberry there, and I thought, my life is done. This is it. I've reached nirvana, because I saw William Morris's thrush eat William Morris's strawberry, and I now understand why this is such a beautiful textile. It's also, however, based on Indian textile designs. You can see there's an influence of Islamic decoration and of Indian textiles here as well. You can see more examples of Morris's handmade and beautiful textiles in the exhibition. This is a critique. It's a refusal of the world of pile it high, sell it cheap, make yourself rich, doesn't matter about the workers, burn as much coal as possible, the stuff that, in my area of West Yorkshire, those pink carpets were being made by. This is the exact opposite. Slow, painstaking, creative. The person who makes it has an ownership of the object at the end, rather than being just part of a great set of cogs and wheels in an industrial machine. You could apply the same sort of ideas to ceramics, as did William de Morgan, and you can see he's been looking at Islamic patterns as well, but creating handmade art pottery. William Morris moved further and actually became a very active socialist. He became a political figure. He wrote pamphlets. I actually got the word socialism into the National Gallery in Washington, and I wondered if any of the senators would actually explode when they saw it. Nobody noticed it in the exhibition that we did there in 2012. But William Morris actually believed that a revolution was necessary, that there is no way to fix the world that we have entered. And so this privileged man from this privileged background gradually moved from a kind of central position in society to a very extreme position, where he really did believe that a revolution was necessary. And indeed, if you want to understand his revolution, which is very different from the kind of Marxist idea of a revolution, you should read his novel, News from Nowhere, which describes him waking up one day. He goes to bed after a horrible day on the London Underground, coughing out carbon and meeting poor and sad people all day. He wakes up, the sun is out, the railway bridge is gone, the world is beautiful, everyone's wearing PreRaphaelite clothes. There's no fine art because everything is art. The bowl on the table is art. And it's 2105. He's been asleep for 200 years. It's a Rip Van Winkle, but it's a socialist aesthetic Rip Van. It's a wonderful book. At the end of the book, you do wonder whether you really want to live in utopia. It seems a bit dull, but nonetheless, it's a really exciting a book to read. let me just end then, and I know my time is up, but with what we've called Utopias for a New Century, because we bring the exhibition right at the end back to Birmingham, where it started and where the objects all come from. What was the impact of all of this on people actually making stuff in this big industrial city? Well, the answer is that they started to turn to the techniques of handmaking, and particularly the Birmingham School of Art became a center for what was called the arts and crafts movement, which of course had a huge impact in the United States, craftsman buildings and the growing up of art pottery and various forms of manufacture by hand in the 1900, 1910 in the US. It's coming out of these people. This is a wonderful object which is hand embroidered by William Morris and Jane Morris's daughter May Morris. These kinds of unique one-off pieces of jewelry, often not using expensive or collectible gems or fine stones, but techniques like enamel, which had been a medieval technique which had been largely forgotten. This, if you go close, very charming. You can see the word Christabel. And this is an engagement present from the artist George Frampton to his wife, Christabel, his fiancée, who was also a designer and artist. It's a beautiful object. It's hand-wrought. There's only one of them. And it uses the sort of chance effects of enamel rather than a sort of machine production process which would make everything look the same, everything look uniform. Absolutely gorgeous object. And here we have an object which tells an interesting story, which I have 1.5 minutes to tell you, which is that in 1901, Charles Robert Ashby gathered together a group of workmen in the East End of London who he'd been working with for 10, 15 years, training them as carpenters and potters and particularly metal workers. And he just took them all into the country. He said, okay, we're going to do what Pugin said. We're going to leave the modern city and go to the medieval countryside. So an unwitting village in the Cotswolds suddenly had 100 Cockney workmen living in it. And apparently the pubs were quite lively in that village at the time. But the idea was just to leave industry behind and to make objects the traditional way. And these beautiful objects from the arts and crafts movement, and particularly from what Ashby called the Guild of Handicraft, were hand-tooled by workmen using traditional methods with the skills that they'd learned over painstakingly through an apprenticeship to make these beautiful one-off objects. They are a kind of riposte to the mass-produced, to the vulgar. Of course, the only tragedy was that they could only be bought by rich people, and almost all of them were people who made their money through industry. So there was a paradox which was never resolved in the arts and crafts movement. But I want to share with you also a very beautiful object, which is by the designer Anne Grisdale Stubbs. Now, a female designer creating arts and crafts metalwork. That shows you that things have moved a long way from the early 19th and mid-19th century. And the agency of women is the point on which the show ends, because women designers came to the fore with the arts and crafts movement. This is Kate Elizabeth Bunce, a wonderful painting called Musica. So obviously it's the spirit of music, but what excites me about it is that it's an oil painting, but it's really also a demonstration of, first, things we've talked about, Ruskin's interest in plants and botany, the PreRaphaelites. Rossetti definitely is an influence on the sort of construction of the female form. But we've also got the textiles, handmade textiles, which she herself, Kate Elizabeth Bunce, made, the beautiful handmade jewelry, which her sister, who was also a designer, created. And then this hand-tooled mirror. So we've got all of the arts working together, and it's female agency which is bringing it to the fore. So let me conclude then with my beautiful textile, which I hope you can now see is both ancient, both medieval and the future, both the past and the future. It's something intensely modern because it refuses to do what this carpet does. Thank you very much. Do you want to take questions? I'm really happy to take any questions. If anyone has questions or comments or observations, just give it a second.
I have one from our online
Yes.
If you're interested. Morris and Co. admired the medieval craftsmen's guilds and emulated this approach to the handmade. Did Morris and the PRBs and the arts and crafts movement artists recognize and acknowledge the short, brutal life of the medieval peasants, or did they have an idealized view of that time period?
Yes, well, unfortunately, it wasn't so great to be a medieval peasant. So the answer is yes. I think Morris might have said, though, that it probably was no worse or even was better to be a medieval peasant living in a society which was self-sustaining and ecologically true to nature than to live in Victorian Birmingham, or dare I say it, late 19th century Pittsburgh, where the physical conditions of life, disease and pollution and so on, and violence were probably greater. But I don't think the Pre-Raphaelites or Pugin or Morris were really interested in the kind of social history of medieval England. It was a symbol, and what the bits that they wanted to return to were not the kind of the idea of the peasant dropping dead in the furrows because he's been ploughing all day. It was the idea of the home in which every object is handmade, and the fact that the family is not split up so that the kids can go up the chimney sweeping soot out of it and this kind of thing. So it was an idealized view of the Middle Ages, absolutely no doubt. Having said that, it was a very creative move. It was a creative way of understanding what was wrong with the world around them. I mean, this kind of what the wonderful historian Mark Sulber Phillips has written a book about this called Contrastive Histories, the way that history really works well if you have an alternative to offer. So there was often in the Victorian era not just the Middle Ages, but there's also the classical world, Greece and Rome. That's the other great contrast that you can say, the moment of purity. So a philosopher like Hegel would say, the world was perfect in its infancy under the Greeks, and it's got more complicated and gone downhill since then. So if you've got something to contrast it with, it helps you to understand what's wrong with the world around you. But I would have to concede that my guys were not great social historians. Yes, question. There's one there first and then one here. Yeah.
Do you see a link between this and the later Bauhaus in Germany? I mean, the style was much different, but, there's a bit of utopia.
Oh, yes.
And the handmade is included.
Absolutely. It's a great question about the Bauhaus in Germany between the wars. There's absolutely no doubt that Gropius and the other Bauhaus figures were reading Ruskin. They all read Ruskin and William Morris. There's a great book by Nicholas Pevsner called Pioneers of Modern Design. And you think it's going to be all about, Vienna, Berlin, Paris. And the first two chapters are Pugin and Ruskin. And he's, as a German scholar, actually trained in the world of the Bauhaus, he saw that as a second movement to a sort of symphony that started in Britain. So I think there's a direct connection, especially that William Morris was read extensively by and published extensively in Germany. One of the other things that helped this to happen was that there were lots of magazines in the late decades of the 19th century where there were illustrated periodicals, like The Studio was one of them, The Connoisseur coming out of London, and then there's one called Simplicissimus, that's right, coming out of Germany. These illustrated magazines which allowed imagery to circulate across national borders, even across language borders, because it was really the plates. People bought the magazines to look at the pictures. And there's the Jugendstil and Art Nouveau. All of them are picking up on things many things. There are many other influences because they're also influenced by folk culture in their own locations. But the basic idea seems to have come from Britain first, and the reason for that is because Britain was the first nation to fully industrialize. So this critique came to the fore earlier in Britain because Birmingham was Birmingham before Pittsburgh was Pittsburgh. Yeah, it's a great question. There's one back there, yes.
I have a question. You ended with that wonderful painting about women's agency within the arts and crafts movement. You also talk a little bit about Elizabeth Bell. Usually we think of her more as a tragic muse, a necessary artist who
Yes, Ruskin was in some ways, but Ruskin was also Elizabeth Siddal's greatest patron. So he paid for her work. So he actually believed in her as an artist. So his theory didn't always map onto his practice. I mean, for those of you who are not familiar with the Elizabeth Siddal story, and I will call your director Lizzie, but I'm going to call Elizabeth Siddal Elizabeth because there's this figure who's been created by a kind of 20th century myth machine, Lizzie Siddal, the tragic heroine, with the red hair. And indeed, her life was miserable because of Dante, Gabriel, Rossetti, and he was a pretty unpleasant character, so yes. But that's what is impressive about Elizabeth Siddal, is that she created this body of work, and she also published poetry in spite of coming from a relatively modest background, and then, being overwhelmed by this, very, very domineering presence of Rossetti, who she then married and tragically died after a miscarriage. And so, her life is tragic, and Rossetti's a big part of it. But let's look at the work. And one of the problems is that there's very little work in public collections. It's all on paper, so it's not on the wall all the time. But what we need is a really good Elizabeth Siddal exhibition. Even if it's 30 works, we would see the achievement and the fact that she was more prepared to break the rules than Rossetti was. So I think she's a really powerful. And one of the key fights is over her name, because, and this is where colleagues disagree with me, and so it splits the PreRaphaelite world down the middle. So it gets really nasty at conferences, this. How many L's on the end of Siddal? Right? I come from Yorkshire, and so does Elizabeth Siddal. And the way you spell that name in Yorkshire is Siddall, which is what it says on her birth certificate, or her census returns from her childhood. The Rossettis thought she wasn't posh enough, she wasn't fancy enough. So I believe, they took the last L off to make her Siddal, right? So she sounds a bit like Stendhal, or sounds a bit French. So she doesn't sound so much like a hat shop worker from Yorkshire, whose father was a cutler. So, there's so many layers of myth. Sometimes she signed her own name without the L on the end, so I don't know what she thought about it. I wish she'd noted that down. But what I'd like to do is to get rid of all those layers of myth and actually allow us to recognize her work as an artist. Now, towards the end of the period the show covers, a lot of those restrictions had changed. For example, the Married Women's Property Act allowed women to keep property after they were married, which unbelievably they were not allowed to do until the 1850s. So there's a lot of changes through the century, and by the end of the century, a lot of the people in art schools are women, young women, who are looking to a career as a designer or a manufacturer or someone to work in what we now call the creative industries, or to be a fine artist. And by the end of the century, a lot of the most important work is being done by women, including several of the works in the last gallery here. So it's in a way, it's tragic that Siddal died so young, because she might have lived into a time where she could have established herself more professionally than she did when she died in 1862. Any more questions? Great. Well, thank you all very much, and I hope you enjoyed the exhibition.